Thank you, Sal, so much for joining us today. As you heard, we have launched the Global Institute for Shaping a Better Future because we know that achieving equity within today's education system doesn't isn't enough. Like we need to prepare kids to actually navigate today's world, which requires that we really, in our minds, rethink the very purpose of education and the outcomes that we're working towards. So our first question is around that. Like as you think about AI and its implications for the world, as well as for education, like how do you think about how it shifts what we should be working towards in education, from the very purpose of education to the outcomes that we should actually be pursuing and oriented towards that purpose?
Yeah, no, look, that's like the ultimate question. You started with the big one. I won't claim that I know 100%. Things are changing so fast, and it's hard to predict even what the economy is going to look like, where the jobs are going to be, even in 10 years. But my best shot at it is I think you're going to have, well, like what's education for? And I think this ch answer doesn't change. I think first and foremost, people need to feel a sense of a purpose and a sense of being able to participate in, let's call it an economy and a society and be able to provide for their families. And then I would say that's primary because if you don't have that, you're not going to be participating in the public square and participating in democracy or whatever. But then I think secondary is to be able to participate in society, have a meaningful life, be part of, civil discourse, all of that. Now, my best guess, this is what I'm doing for, what I'm suggesting for my own children is I do think I've always been a bit of a tradition, what I call a traditionalist plus. Every time, sometimes in progressive education circles, there's been this notion of like, oh, calculators exist, kids don't need to learn arithmetic anymore, or the internet exists, people don't have to learn content knowledge anymore. I've always super disagreed with that. If anything, all the evidence has shown us that the calculator is used most by people who know how to do arithmetic. They're the ones that their intent is amplified the most by that technology. Similarly, yes, being able to do Google search, you can look up anything, but those who have the content knowledge are able to use those tools better and frankly are able to participate in the knowledge economy and leverage those tools to a larger extent. And so I think in an AI world, yes, it's going to be able to write for us, write code for us, do all sorts of things. And I think it will help people who have very basic skills. But I think the people who are going to get the most out of it are the people who have fairly advanced skills. No one wants a programming, a software engineering manager who can't program at least reasonably well or can at least understand what the staff engineers are doing. No one wants to have an editor in chief who doesn't at least be able to work with the staff writers. And we're all going to be editor in chiefs now. So that's one. Keep learning your reading, your writing, your mathematics. I think the other element is, and this is more of a particular thing to AI, the tools are changing so fast. I'd call it like a tool entrepreneurship is the best way I can frame it. Every 6 months now, we have a whole new set of tools. And to be able to say, hey, wow, if I take tool A, take its output, and then put it into tool B, and then I go talk to my buddy across the hall and take their output from tool C, I can put it into tool D, and I get this new thing that used to take us 6 months, and now we can do it in 6 hours. I think that
Yeah.
skill is a very powerful one. And then the last thing I'll say, and I think this is what AI actually might open up for us, is historically, some people like to pick on standardized exams. I've historically defended standardized exams because you do need to measure things, and it's ideally better to measure them in a standardized way. But I think the main criticism of standardized exams, which is reasonably valid, is right now the only way that we've known to measure things at scale in a standardized way is to have fairly narrow assessments. Things like multiple choice exams, which are most standardized exams. I think AI is going to open up the aperture in terms of what we can measure in a semi-standardized way. Be able to have an oral exam, give a talk, draw a picture, go into a simulation. And I think that's going to be really powerful because it's going to open up the aperture of the things that we can measure. And part of me also hopes that, many of these soft skills that, or we've traditionally called them soft skills because they're hard to measure, skills like creativity, skills like salesmanship, interpersonal skills. I actually think there's going to be ways to maybe quantify those a little bit better, potentially leveraging AI or maybe peer-to-peer or things like that. I was talking to a CEO of a large biotech firm. They have like 30,000 salespeople in Africa. And I was just pushing him on what are the requirements to become a salesperson. And he's like, oh, we require a college degree. And I say, why? Do you see a
Yeah.
correlation between GPA and how good someone sells? And he's like, not really. And I was like, I bet you
Yeah.
there's a lot of really good potential salespeople who are not college graduates. And if we could
Mm.
find that signal, you could probably get a better signal than a college degree. So I think you're going to start seeing things like that too.
Yeah, interesting. One thing about what you just shared in your overall answer, I mean, there's so many folks who are saying now that AI can do all these things, we don't need to learn those things. And you're basically saying, no, not in your mind, that's not true. So that's super helpful. One thing I just mull on, and I don't know that there's an answer to this, but what about the fact that with AI, just all the misinformation, right? Like it's harder than ever to tell what's real, what's not. What are the implications of that for what we work toward? I'm not even sure there's an answer to that. So maybe it's not about, but I'm just curious, like, what does that mean we need to do in our classrooms to help people navigate this world of wrought with misinformation?
Yeah, and as this isn't a new phenomena. Even 20 years ago, you do a Google search, you're not 100% sure whether you're getting a valid source. And I mean, to some degree, 20 years ago, people weren't search engine optimizing, and there wasn't money being thrown at sites that are just trying to, get you to click on ads and all of that. So you actually probably did get better information 20 years ago than you do today. But
Yeah.
today, even before we talk about generative AI, as we know, we're all in our, I try to not be in my social media bubble, but I'm probably am, and I don't use social media much, but most of society is in some type of a social media bubble, where it is, some of the stuff that you see are real, but even that might be selective real. Like they're just giving you the parts of the truth that will trigger you and reinforce your points of view. And even that is a form of misinformation, really. Actually, in some ways, that might be the worst form of misinformation when you selectively
Mm.
quote someone and things like that. It's not a lie, but you're not giving the full
Yeah.
picture. But then you also get a lot of information that's honestly just made up. Probably on a weekly basis, I'm talking my mom down from some, you know, she's super worked
Yeah.
up about something, and I'm like, well, let's validate whether that actually. Sometimes it actually did happen. I'm
You
like, oh
and
my
me
God, how
both.
did
Yeah.
that's real? But a lot of times it didn't happen, and I'm trying to tell her not to get super worked up and to forward it to every friend that she has until she really knows. And not to
Yeah.
over plug books. I saw there was a conversation about some of the my books, and this is something that I'm one of five authors here, so it's not I won't call it just my book. But this was done
Yeah.
with, and many people know Douglas Fisher and Nancy Fry. There's different things people are thinking about in an AI world. There's a world of like learning about AI, like how does a large language model work? What can it do? What can it not do? Then there's the learning with AI. Okay, I want to learn math. I want to learn science. I want to learn reading. Can AI improve me?
Mm.
And then there's learning to use AI or amplify AI. And that's kind of what you're touching on. And we have these quests in this book, and one of them is about validating information. That is an important skill. Yes, kids are going to
Mhm.
be using AIs the rest of their life. Hopefully, these AIs get a lot better at validating information, and they have already actually in the last 2, 3 years. They hallucinate a lot less. They're some of the better AIs are giving you sources. You can validate the
Yeah.
information, but it still is always healthy to know how to validate yourself. But I
Yeah.
stress this, even in I'm really plugging a lot of books now, but I stress this even in Brave New Words, which is even with a human being in a classroom, it's good to validate that. I mean, just
Yeah.
the same when my mom tells me something, I'm like, I don't know if that's true. And I've had situations where even like if we talk
Yeah.
enough, you're going to hear something from me, and you're like, you should probably validate that.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's true, but my mind might be hallucinating. So I think those are the skills that are going to. How do you put the tools together? How do you validate
Yeah.
these things? How do you get more out of them, et cetera?
Yeah. Okay, so as we think about how to live into these purposes of education and how to develop students holistically so that they can navigate this world, super curious how you see what you see as the most powerful applications of AI in a school context. So, for example, like the school models, like the alpha schools that many of us have read so much about, where they're kind of doing the 2 hours a day of using AI to learn all the academics, and then that frees up so much time for enrichment. Like in your own experience from Khan Academy, from Conmigo, like what are your thoughts about does that model make sense? Or what are your thoughts about the most powerful applications of AI, I guess, to get to our objectives?
Yeah, and I'll start where you left off with alpha schools, and I'm reasonably familiar with alpha schools. They've been super users of Khan Academy from the beginning. They're very similar. There's a school I started out here. This is one my kids go to called Khan Lab School. Very similar model. The idea is if you use and this was pre-AI, use intelligent use of technology, um, and get really focused on some of that core content, it frees up the rest of the day to do more open-ended exploration, simulations, hands-on learning, experiential learning, whatever you want to call it. I think the alpha school narrative that we've been hearing the last couple of months, I think it's maybe a little bit overly anchored on the AI side of things. My understanding is a lot of that 2 hours is still, let's call it, traditional Khan Academy or other ed tech
Mhm.
tools. And that makes sense. I mean, we're seeing that at Khan Academy, that it's
Yeah.
really about the way you learn, and this is true for hundreds of thousands of years. The way you learn is you get practice at your learning edge and you get immediate feedback. And you need to be engaged in that. And teachers are a super powerful engagement mechanism to hold you accountable. My understanding of some of what Alpha Schools is doing is that they do have an AI that is helping be a little bit of a guide, helping be a little bit of a
Mhm.
mentor, but still a lot of that learning is happening through platforms like Khan Academy. But yeah, generally speaking, I think it makes a lot of sense. We have 50 plus efficacy studies on Khan Academy, and they all have essentially the same narrative. If students are even able to put in, let's call it 60 minutes a week of personalized practice, they're accelerating 30, 40, 50%. And at first you're like, wow,
Mhm.
is that magic? And then if you really were to go with a clipboard and a stopwatch, and if you were to observe most classrooms of how much time kids are getting where they're really working at their learning edge, they're not bored, they're not lost, and they're able to get practice right at that learning edge, and they're able to get immediate feedback. If you're able to do it focus for 60 minutes, that will actually be like half or
Yeah.
80% of all the practice you're going to get all week. So, and if you look at your average school day in a traditional school, 6 hours, but if you actually had a stopwatch of how much of that is the student actively learning and getting
Mhm.
feedback, I would be surprised if you get more than 2 hours out of it. So,
Yeah.
I don't think this is about AI or not AI. I think it's about how do you maximize the amount of time that students are doing active learning at their zone of proximal development, at their learning edge. That's what you're trying to do. And if AI can help you do that, but it doesn't have to be AI, it could be pencil and paper, it could be peer-to-peer learning, it could be traditional Khan
Yeah.
Academy, or it could be with Khanmigo, whatever, then you're going to get better outcomes.
So let's talk about, I mean, you've been so clear just from the beginning of, I don't know, when I first heard you first talk about just the role of teachers and how technology and AI, it doesn't do anything but maybe put more demand on teachers to be fantastic. Like, and I'm just curious, I mean, you've worked with a lot of teachers and you've seen a lot of teachers like leveraging technology and AI. Like, what have you come to think is most important in teachers? And as we think about the challenge of how do we recruit and develop the next generation of teachers, like, what's your advice to us? Like, what do we need to be most focused on?
15 years ago, if you asked me, I thought I was maybe a little bit more angled on the technology side, where I was like, if you can just create the most beautiful, adaptive, gamified, and that all will help. I mean, something like that is easier to engage with than a textbook from the 1800s. But I now think it's all about engagement. If you can get
Mm,
someone to engage in their learning, you're going to get good outcomes. If they're not engaged, it doesn't matter how fa if they're engaged, you can give them a textbook from the 19th century and they will learn. And if they're not
yeah,
engaged, you can give them the fanciest AI, whatever, and nothing's going to happen. And I do think
yeah,
that ed tech providers like Khan Academy, we're going to do our best to gamify things, make things palatable, leverage AI to hopefully drive all of that. And I think that will there. I would guess for 20% of students, especially maybe older students who are already pretty motivated, that might be sufficient. But for the
mm,
bulk of students, having that human being in the classroom, holding them accountable, driving engagement, and engagement, there's a lot of teachers on this call right now. It's not just, hey, student, go do that. I mean, that helps. There's just the
mm,
teacher saying, this is your assignment, get this done by next week, etc. That helps. But a lot of it is then sitting down next to the student, trying to form a connection with them, maybe some of the kids are working independently. That gives you as a teacher time to talk to 5 or 6 kids at a time so that they feel seen and engage and
Yeah.
try to diagnose what's going on. And I think that's why most people go into the teaching profession. They don't want to, they're looking. We all
Yeah.
remember the teachers that looked us in the eye and said, "Hey, Sal, I believe in you. Have you
Yeah.
thought about doing
Yeah.
this? Or what's going on? Is something going on at home? Whatever." The ideal is technology, including AI, can open that up, and that can open up. Teachers don't won't have to spend as much time creating assignments, grading assignments, doing lesson plans, writing IEPs,
Mm.
and they have much more of that energy to come into the classroom, co-creating with the AI. They'll have a really engaging lesson plan. Kids are working with each
Yeah.
other in groups, and then the teacher can walk around. And eventually, this doesn't exist yet. I do think you're going to have the AI, you're going to have some AirPods in there, and the AI is going to whisper into the teacher's ear, like, "Hey, go to table 4." They're having a
Yeah.
little bit of a conflict there, and I don't have a
Yeah.
body, so you need
Yeah.
to go or go talk to Mary. She's a little disengaged. Why don't you praise her on the work she did
Yeah.
yesterday? Things like that.
I mean, we've done all these studies across Teach for All about what differentiates the most effective teachers over time. And certainly, like relationalism, like the ability to develop relationships with everyone, students, families, other teachers in the schools, is like top of the chart. The other thing we've seen is that we basically come to believe that we need to help all of us adults in the system unlearn how we were taught, especially like how we were taught to view students and teachers and their relationship, and learn a new way of seeing like students as whole people who can lead today, seeing teachers as sort of co-learners, right? Like rather than sage on the stage. I'm curious what that sparks for you, but it feels like we just have a massive unlearning project to do among teachers worldwide if we're ever going to actually get to the place where we're fostering student agency. And those first 17 years, instead of fostering like the idea that students should be passive receptacles of information.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It's interesting because there have been studies that, we talked about teachers being able to form relations. Another strong correlate with efficacy of a teacher is how deep their subject matter knowledge often is. I don't think that's actually in tension with what you just said, because what I have found is people with deep subject matter knowledge, they actually tend to be more secure in telling the student, "You know what, I forgot that," or "Actually, I never learned that aspect of it. Let's learn that together,"
Yeah.
which I think is a very powerful. Students really gravitate to the teacher. Maybe it's an algebra class. The teacher knows calculus, and those are all the studies that, they know where the math
Mhm.
is going. But if that teacher says, "I forgot how to do synthetic division. Let's learn that together. Let's, get up a Khan Academy video, or let's go ask this other student who knows."
Yeah.
That's incredibly confidence building. It models for the student really how they should navigate the world. And, we've often seen the opposite sometimes where a teacher maybe is kind of keeping up with the students, isn't super well versed in some of the more advanced topics. And then some of those teachers sometimes feel the need to say, "Don't question. Hey, you're asking too many questions," or just let's just follow
Yeah.
exactly what I'm telling you right now. Don't go off of that because they're worried about it. And either kids will feel in that situation like, "Oh, I guess I shouldn't ask questions," or I guess I should, just stick to the plan.
Mm.
But it really is a sign
Yeah.
of kind of shutting things down out of fear as opposed to out of
Yeah.
like comfort and exploration.
Yeah. So I want to open this up before too long, and I can see that there are lots of questions from the audience. But before we do, I want to get into some of the real risks of AI and get your latest take on it. Maybe just three big questions here. One, just the risk that somehow this technology is going to prevent students from doing the kind of deep learning that needs to be done by just enabling them to circumvent the process, to cheat on exams. How do you think about that? Like, what are we going to do to mitigate
Yeah.
that possible risk?
Yeah, there's a chapter in my book about cheating, and I always like to start, well, what was the state of the world before AI? And it turns out there was a heavy dose of cheating, actually, especially at the higher
Yeah,
education level. And it's interesting because when you and I were in high school and college, I think it was I mean, I'll speak for myself. I think we felt comfortable doing like homework together, um, and helping each other with homework. But I didn't know anyone when we had take home exams that, like, if someone said, "Hey, Sal, you want to work on this take home exam together?" I'd be like, you're shady. You know, like, I don't know if I want to be your friend anymore.
Yeah.
But there's some surveys from Stanford and from Middlebury that I cite in the book where it's like this had kind of become mainstream. And unfortunately, I do think it's a byproduct of some honor codes that were almost too permissive. I cite some that were happening at Stanford, where one of the for it was a longstanding honor code where even the proctored exams weren't allowed to have a proctor, weren't allowed to have
Yeah.
a professor in the room, which actually I think is a signal that you don't trust the professor. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. And there was cases of then students openly cheat. No one wants to report them because they don't want to ruin that kid's life by because they're openly cheating. But then you feel like, wow, I'm at a disadvantage because I'm not. So it creates this negative cycle. Now enter onto the stage generative AI, and it's gone to a whole other level. Essays are the backbone of a lot of liberal arts educations, and not just liberal arts, all educations, but especially. And so there's surveys out now, and I've even polled a lot of the college students I know who I think are generally ethical people, smart, thoughtful college students, and they're like, everyone's just using Chat GPT to write their essays. So I think this is an issue. People, the system has to adapt. They can't put their head in the ground and just pretend like it's not happening. I think it's going to be a combination of you are going to have to do more in-class work. I actually think that's always been a best practice as opposed to lecturing. Like make people do things in class and whether it's
Mm.
math, whether it's writing, and then you as a teacher get to see how it's happening for them, and how difficult it is, or where they might need more support. So I think you are going to have to do more of that, especially for things. Well, actually, I'll take a step back. A lot of educators and schools have just knee-jerk, oh, I'm going to make kids write because that's what I'm supposed to do in a history class, or that's what I'm supposed to do in an English class. I think it is first good to take a step back. It's like, well, what were we trying to get at by making them do that? What are the skills? And I think there's good answers. I'm trying to get them to structure their thoughts. I'm trying to get them
Mm.
to be able to do research or interview people or do that and synthesize information. And I want to know that, and I want that they have solid grammar, whatever it might be. And now we say, okay, in this world, we should just assume that if the kids are by themselves, they have access to Chat GPT. What do you do? Some of that,
Yeah.
more in-class writing, if you really want to make sure that they are building that craft of writing, which as we talked about earlier, I think is very important. The other extreme, and I think this is going to be appropriate for older students, maybe sometimes middle school as well, let them use Chat GPT. That is going to be a life skill. At Khan Academy, I'm putting pressure, gentle pressure on our employees. Hey, you should be using these tools.
Yeah.
Become more productive, get a first draft, whatever it is. So that's going to be an important skill. And actually, that might, if the skill that you wanted the student to develop is independent research, going in and interviewing people or starting a business, then that's
Hmm.
great. They can spend less time formatting and writing their perfect sentences, and they could spend more time doing true research, not just
Yes.
paraphrasing something they saw on Wikipedia. They can do true research, go talk to people, set up an experiment. That's things that AI won't
Yeah.
do. And then the middle ground, and this is where we've been building tools, Khan Academy Writing Coach. The middle ground is I want students to be able to do a more, let's call it a more independent work, but I want to make sure that it's their work. And so this is where the teacher can create the assignment with the AI, and then the student does it with the AI, the same AI. The AI won't do it for them, but it guides them. Hey, let's work on the thesis statement. Let's do some
Hmm.
outlining now. All right, now why don't you draft? And okay, now I'm going to give you some feedback on different parts of it. And then when you submit
Yeah.
this, the teacher doesn't just get the final output, they get the process. They can talk to the AI. They can say, hey, how long does this student take? Do you see any trends in my classroom? And the AI can say, and this all, hey, a lot of kids are having
Yeah.
trouble with thesis statements. Why don't we reteach that? And if a student goes to Chat GPT, and there was a 60 Minutes piece last November where Anderson Cooper, he tried to cheat on his seventh grade essay, and he copy and pasted in from Chat GPT. And our tool told the teacher, hey, look, this piece was not something that we worked on. It's a little bit different than his other writing. You should look at it. And I think that's
Yeah.
important too, not to just call out kids for cheating. I mean, if there's one thing I'll
Yeah.
tell all the educators here, anyone who says they have an AI detector is lying to you. It's snake oil. These AI detectors like
Mm.
GPT-0 and Zero GPT and others, they have a 40% false positive rate, which means you're going to be falsely
Wow.
kids 40% of the time. That's
Mm,
actually probably a bigger problem, I actually think, than even the cheating.
mm,
I was speaking to some students, there were student trustees of the University of California, and they were saying, yeah, there's all sorts of false accusations going on, and it's serious. I mean,
yeah,
you can get kicked out of school, you could fail a class
yeah,
because of a false accusation. And I'll tell you an interesting story. My daughter, this was last year. I've after this, I've given the same sermon to the faculty at Khan Lab School about these tools. I saw my daughter, who was in eighth grade at the time. She wrote her essay, and then I saw her running it through Chat GPT to introduce errors into her essay so that the teacher's AI detector didn't think that she used an AI to write her
yeah,
essay. And I'm like,
yeah,
that's all backwards. And then I went and I
yeah,
talked to us like, look, I know you have well intentioned, but these tools are not giving you. So yeah, no one here should pretend that they can detect AI. The way that you can detect it is by having transparency of the process and maybe being notified if certain parts are copied and pasted in or seem different than the rest of
yeah.
yes.
I had a really interesting conversation with the kind of education team at Anthropic recently, and one of the former teachers, Teach for America Corps member actually on their team, has a whole thing around like if we can get students early on in their education journey to declare their intentions around how they're going to leverage AI to accelerate their learning and how not, like almost create your own rules for yourself, like that can really change kids' orientation to this. And that really struck me as like completely resonant. So it really may be about like, I don't know, getting back to the self, like what are we going to hold ourselves to, the honor codes, et cetera. I mean, we'll see in addition to everything else. Next big risk, of course, like in no order, but just mental health, safety of kids. I mean, we're all seeing all of these examples of AI, I mean, putting kids at risk. Do you have thoughts on the child safety questions? Like, what are we going to do about this?
Yeah, and we're going to learn more over the coming decades. I mean, the tools are changing so fast. I would have never guessed 20 years ago, if we were talking about social media, that it would have, frankly, the negative consequences that it's having now on mental
Yeah,
health, on our social fabric, on polarization, on breaking down democracy. I mean, who would have thought that
yeah,
something as harmless as sharing, short tweets or little pictures with friends, because these algorithms are trying to optimize for engagement, and you get in one very easy way to do that is to, in you know reinforce people's beliefs and get them outraged and make them feel bad that they
yeah,
weren't, invited to a party. I don't know if it's even possible to predict exactly all of the things that AI is going to be doing on this front in 20 years. I'm hopeful. The reason why I'm hopeful is, let's just take the social media example. The social media companies right now, they do have these algorithms that are trying to feed you the thing that you're most likely going to engage with, which unfortunately happens to polarize you and work you up. But they have this kind of like plausible deniability. They're like, we're just a platform, free speech. And look, it is a hard thing. It's not easy to come up with a rule of like what you can post on Instagram and what you can't, or what you should be able to post on YouTube and what you shouldn't. So that is a hard problem. I don't want to completely dismiss that these
mm,
people aren't trying, but the reality is that they have this plausible deniability, and then all this content gets uploaded, and it does pull you into these rabbit holes that tend to pull you to extremes or work you up or hit your mental your self-esteem or your mental health. The good thing about the major models, OpenAI, Gemini, etc., is there's less plausible deniability. We've seen several cases over the last several years where one of these models does something embarrassing. And there, people do use social media to shame the companies because they can't say,
yeah,
oh, this wasn't our content. They have to adapt. So I think that accountability is actually a positive one. I
mm,
think the other positive thing that I've seen generally, we've done a lot of testing, on Conmigo, we've done a lot of testing and say, okay, what if someone says when people put vaccines, they're putting chips in to track you and all of that? And if you do a web search for that, or if you go on social media, you will get things that will validate that point of view. More people believe in a flat earth now, I think, than like any time in the last like 200 or 300 years. Like I recently met a distant family member who it blew my mind is a flat earther.
mm,
He claims he has all this evidence. He actually offered to like he gave me a book to read
yeah,
about that.
yeah,
I'm like, oh man, this is where am I?
no,
But the AIs, once again, because there isn't this plausible deniability, they can bring you back to kind of mainstream thinking. And I don't think they
Mm.
necessarily dilute everyone's point of view because we try to do this with Conmigo. It will allow you to weigh the pros and cons of anything where there is data on two sides. And I actually think
Yeah.
there it's very helpful because there's some conversations people are afraid to have, or you do want to, might not be politically correct to poke that side of the argument, but maybe with AI
Yeah.
you could test that a little bit in a safer environment. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'm kind of hopeful. Yes, there are going to be cases of kids coming, they want to harm themselves, and there are, and there was that weird thing where an AI told themselves, this was a case where the person didn't
Yeah.
commit suicide, but they told them to once again, that's embarrassing for the models, and they will hopefully fix those types of things.
Yeah.
I'll give another example. I'm using my daughter a lot. She's now 14. She's always a little bit snarky with our youngest, who's we have three kids. Our youngest is almost 11, and a couple of weeks ago, all of a sudden, I see her being really nice to him. Like she's including. He always wants to hang out with her friends and play with them and all that, and she's no doesn't want that. She was including him all of a sudden, and she was being very kind to him. And I'm like, and later when I got her alone, I was like, I really appreciate what you're doing. Like that's how did this happen? And she's like, well, I didn't know this was happening. I've been journaling with Chat GPT about how annoying my little brother is. And Chat GPT reminded me that, I'm only going to be living with him for another 4 years. When we are older, I'm going to really reminisce about these times. The reason why he annoys me is he looks up to me. And I'm
This
like,
is incredible. I love it.
yeah, and like we couldn't, nothing better than that.
Yeah.
So I'm not willing to
Nothing.
write it off. I think in mental health generally, my wife's a physician, and
Mm.
it blows my mind when people need mental health resources. It's like the hardest thing possible. Like
It's so hard.
if you're going through
Yeah.
depression or you're having a panic attack, and now you have to call your insurance company to figure out who's in the provider network, and then you have to call like 10 people and they're all going to say that they're full, or maybe they can squeeze you in January. Like, and
Yeah.
you're at like
No,
the
it's
lows of
true.
depression, or you're having
It's
a panic
true.
attack. Like, so I'm hoping that this stuff can make, maybe make help a little bit more immediately accessible,
Yeah,
which it's not.
totally. How do you think about this in terms of equity? Like it has so much potential to advance equity, and yet there's so much potential that it just becomes a bigger divider given all the factors we know about access and even literacy levels, which are going to hold people back from using it. How do you think about it?
It's a real thing. I mean, I could say in my neck of the woods, Khan Lab School and out here in Silicon Valley, kids have been fluent with these models. In fact, many of the kids have been using these models before ChatGPT. They've been
Mm.
doing generative AI models. They're very well versed in how to use these tools. They're using these tools for creating art and so they are, the workforce that they go into in the next 5 to 10 years is going to expect some fluency here. They're going to really value that that tool entrepreneurship that I talked about earlier. Well, I'll give an example. When you and I were entering college, or maybe high school, college, early workforce, things like spreadsheets and even, I'm dating myself a little bit, but like the word process, the typewriter to word processor to computer transition happened when I was in about middle
Mm.
school. And if you, I remember my mom was going to some training to become a secretary, and it was like learning to use a word processor was like a big skill back in the 80s. But
Mm.
now we just assume it's a fluency. But there was a transition where those of us who had some exposure to these tools had a real advantage. We knew how to make a PowerPoint presentation, we knew how to use a spreadsheet, we knew how to copy and paste on a document, which all
Yeah.
seems so basic now. And now everyone knows how to do that. But I think you are going to have a similar transition in the next 5, 10 years where you are going to have people who know how to prompt better. I mean, I even see that within Khan Academy. Everyone can prompt, but there are people who I think are better at just like knowing,
Hmm.
kind of getting into the mind of the AI and pushing it and making it produce a better output, or realizing that, hey, I could use this to transcribe my writing, my voice, and then I could use that, put that into an AI, and it can structure it. And so yeah, it's a
Yeah.
real thing. So that's why I think it is important for kids to know these tools exist, to have access to them, to have some assignments. I
Yeah.
think ideally every class should have, maybe third grade and up should have at least one
Yeah.
assignment over the course of the term where they actually use one of these models to do something.
Yeah. So, but to double click on the equity question, I'm going to bring in a question from Salsabil Celli. She says, as a teacher working with students who have hearing disabilities, I'm concerned about equity. How can AI tools be adapted for countries with fewer resources to ensure these learners aren't left behind and the gap doesn't widen?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I won't claim that I have a magic wand that will completely just, eliminate the gaps, but I'm optimistic. If we think about kids who, have certain disabilities, whether it's visual or auditory or whatever, I mean, one of the really cool things about these models is that they're multimodal. They can go from speech to text, text to speech. So actually, I think a lot of tools that weren't as accessible before with a fairly simple layer of some generative AI or maybe a separate tool, you can start to interface with some of these things. You can transcribe what's ever being said into,
Mhm.
I mean, we already see it. We're taking it for granted, even on things like Zoom. In the last, I don't know, it's been about 5 years probably, things like
Yeah.
automatic closed captioning has happened. That's because of generative AI.
Mhm.
So, automatic translation between languages is happening. Probably in
Yeah.
the next 2, 3 years, we're all going to have glasses on that will automatically real-time translate things for us or even visual signs and things like that. So that will be, I think, a very good thing. Generative AI, even though it is better in some of the larger mainstream languages, it is also surprisingly good at some of the less resource languages. I remember when we first had access, this was 6 months before ChatGPT came out. Sam Altman, Greg Brockman gave us access to what would become GPT-4. This was summer of 2022. I remember asking them when they gave me access, I was like, does this work in any other languages? And they said, no, we don't think it does. And my family were
Mm.
Bengali. I barely speak Bengali, but I tried to see what would happen, and it replied back to me in Bengali. And then I took a screenshot
Yeah.
and I sent that to Sam and Greg, and they're like, "Yeah, after you asked, we checked. It looks like it speaks every language." So it was like this emergent,
Wow. Incredible.
and it's to different degrees.
Yeah.
But just out of the box, the major language models will speak probably the top 20 languages quite well. They start to
Yeah.
drift when you get to the languages that are very far from
Yeah.
Germanic or Latin based languages. So if you go to Mandarin and all of that, it gets a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
But we also know that in those languages, they're creating large language models in Mandarin and Arabic and things like that. So I actually think there's a world where without large language models, English was just taking over more and more of the universe. And I do think we are at a point now that it is important for, if you go into any country, if someone learns English, their economic opportunities, their social opportunities, everything will go up. So I know it might sound a little colonial and, look, even my grandparents spoke English well because of colonialism, because of
Yeah.
British India. But that was a positive benefit because has
Mhm.
become, but I also think that, um, generative AI will allow people to preserve languages in certain
Yeah.
ways, especially because they can be vocal, even accents and things like that. I like to think about even when you hear some radio announcers from the 50s, they sound so different. But we might have a world, and that might not be a good thing where we even preserve
Yeah.
accents and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like clearly the tool has so much it can do to bring more equity, more inclusiveness, and we just have our work cut out for us to ensure access to connectivity to teachers who know how to use it. I mean, we all know we've got massive work to do, and I hope our network can help be a force for leveraging this as a force for equity and true transformation of education. But moving on, and we have so many questions, so let's see if we can get through some of these. Sneha from Salzburg is asking, as AI continues to reshape the economy, what do you see as the must-have human skills that are least likely to be replaced by technology in the future of work? And on a personal note, and I'm so curious about this too, if someone is considering pursuing a PhD, shouldn't they be worried about AI diminishing its value, or is it still worth it?
Yeah, I'll take that in reverse order. I've actually been thinking that a PhD is going to be more, depending where you do your PhD or what you do it in, I should say. Because AI, there was a time where I thought about doing a PhD. At one point I wanted to become a physicist and then a mathematician, and I even had a period where I thought I was going to go into like medicine and maybe I could help cure diseases. And I was discouraged because I thought, well, I'd have to go very narrow. And then what are the odds that I'll actually discover a new math theorem? What are the odds that I'll actually push discover a new drug that could cure cancer? It's
Mhm.
very, no matter how hard you work or how smart you are, it's a little bit, there's a lot of luck. AI is going to dramatically accelerate that. I think, and you're already seeing it. The fact that Google DeepMind won the Nobel Prize in chemistry for finding for doing the protein, before you could do a PhD thesis on just finding the structure of one protein. They did it for all the
Mhm.
proteins. So this technology is going to dramatically accelerate anyone who's trying to do basic research. And I think it's very exciting because I think if you go into PhD in biology or chemistry or physics, I actually think you will probably find a cure for a disease now. All of this stuff is going to accelerate. So I think it can be very, very promising. Um, and actually, in almost every field, there's going to be huge. Can I take generative AI and use it to do interesting things in history or sociology and anything? So I actually think it's more exciting to do a PhD than maybe in the past.
Mhm.
In terms of human skills, I do think these ideas of communication, being able to collaborate, these things that we've been calling soft skills, resilience for many years, I
Mhm.
think these become that much more important. I've been saying, and I don't say this just because it's the nice thing to say, I do think teaching and similar professions are going to be very, very safe because no matter how good the tools you create are, to keep kids engaged, to make them part of a community, look, there's a reason I started a physical school and my kids go to a physical school. In theory, I could have stuck them on Khan Academy and some MOOCs and whatever, and they
Yeah.
probably would have learned certain things, but they wouldn't have learned these very important skills. Someone, my kids come home and they tell me that sometimes they might have a little they don't like what their teacher did, or they don't like the school's policy on this or that, or I could tell they have a little conflict with some friends. At first, my reaction as their dad is to say, "Oh, let me see how I can," and then I'm like, "No, this is good.
Yeah.
This is actually maybe the
Yeah.
stuff that you can't learn from Khan Academy, that you can't learn from an
Yeah.
AI. I think these professions that are very human centered, like
Mhm.
teaching. Um, I think there's going to be many in healthcare. I mean, there's definitely talk. I think we're going to be able to democratize healthcare. You're going to have AI being able to diagnose and even prescribe. But I think
Mhm.
some of the just being able to care for people. Hopefully, we have a more abundant society and a lot of those resources. We have a loneliness epidemic. I hate to say, we'll pay people to go hang out with other people. Hopefully we don't have to, but I think we might have to do some stuff like that because it will, but the human side,
Yeah.
being able to
I've
sell
been
well.
thinking so much about this across Teach for All. Like, this should
Yeah.
be our opportunity of a lifetime
Yes.
in terms of
Yes.
recruitment. It should be. Let's
Yeah.
see. Okay, while we're on the topic of your kids, I have to pull this question in. As a father, how do you talk and guide your own kids in their relationship with AI? And how does this mirror or not the approach and messages they receive from their schools? Though I think you created their school, so maybe just, yeah.
Yeah, it's there is a little bit of tension if I'm honest. Like the school's policy is you can't use generative AI for independent assignments. Well, the teachers usually say don't use it. Every now and then they do give them an assignment where they are supposed to use generative AI. There's definitely been cases where like one of my children is kind of they're struggling getting started on their assignment, and I'm like, oh, why don't you just brainstorm with Chat GPT or Conmigo? And they're like, I'm not allowed to. And I'm like, oh, well, I mean, it wouldn't, I don't think that's cheat, but I don't want to push them in a direction that their teacher isn't comfortable with. So I have to kind of, especially given my name's on the school, I have to be a little bit delicate there. And my son loves to program. He's always my oldest son, and he's always creating like video games and this and that. And I'm like, oh, well, why don't you do some vibe coding and why don't you use AI to, he's like, no, that's cheating. That's cheating. I can't do that. And I'm like,
Wow.
Imran, we're like really encouraging all of our software engineers to really lean into this, and they're getting like two, three times. It's not cheating. You'll just be able to do more in less time, and it's you're not going to be giving up those skills.
Wow.
So yeah, there is a
It's telling
real
me you built a school with a powerful culture. I mean, my kid comes home and is like, they're telling me I can't use it, but that's baloney.
It
They
is.
can
I mean,
do
on
whatever.
one level, I'm happy that my kids, and actually, I think all of their friends are actually, yeah, they actually do follow the honor code. But
Yeah.
um, I, and I do, as I just said, I do think that they have to learn to
Yeah.
do much of this stuff on their own. But I am
Yeah.
also encouraging, I'm telling my oldest son, like, if you really want to become a game developer, if you don't lean into these tools, you're
Mhm.
not going to become a game developer.
Another question from Sanaya, who leads the student leadership work across Teach for All. Most ed tech AI is built for students, not with them. What do you see as the role of students in co-designing AI tools, ensuring these systems reflect their needs, creativity, and leadership?
Yeah, and I'll modify that a little bit. I think they're most actually I think are kind of designed for with students, but unfortunately a lot of them are going to the lowest common denominator. And even before AI, there were, I'll name names. There were sites like Photomath, Chegg, that at the high level, they said, we'll help you with your homework. But the reality is, we will do your homework for you, or we will. And so it's not a coincidence that Chegg stock kind of
Mhm.
went to zero as soon as ChatGPT came out. And I think there are a lot of startups that are out there, and they know that they can drive adoption if they just figure out a better way for kids to cheat. Now, a very thoughtful kid will potentially use these tools just for an explanation, but unfortunately, a lot of kids are cutting corners. We're trying our best to work with teachers and students, and we're out there, we're doing the user research, we're talking to them, but we're trying to make sure that there are the guardrails in place, that it's encouraging the student and the teachers to do the best practices.
Yeah. Let me try to squeeze in two more questions out of the many here. One from Keem Sabria, who you may know started Edpuzzle. And he's asking, once the novelty fades on the question of teacher use, like what's the must-have value for teachers that keeps them coming back every week? He's curious what percentage of the registered users in Conmigo are weekly active teachers today, and what feedback you get from the people who stop using it.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's something that we're wrestling with because and I'm, we're not the only people who've created like AI tools that help teachers create lesson plans and um, create quizzes and things like that. What we did find is that, you put it out there. We got a big grant from Microsoft, so we could offer it free to all teachers around the world. So, everyone can go to Conmigo and use, and it's free, and there's not going to be some bait and switch later on. But what we do find is, yeah, there is a big drop off for that use case, that kind of transactional use case that a lot of teachers haven't created kind of a workflow where they're used doing it every day. And even on the student side, we've seen something similar. There's a small percentage of students who immediately know how to use the AI constructively and do it. But we've realized it's analogous to me walking into a classroom and saying, "Hey, I'm a tutor. I'm going to go to the back of the room. Come ask me a question." Most kids won't do that. You need to proactively go to the student and help them. We have a new version of Conmigo, Khan Academy, and we're not even really separating Conmigo because it's all one thing now, where um, we really want to, we imagine there's this planning, delivery, assessment loop that goes on in every classroom. And if we can connect those things in ways that truly streamline it for the teacher and the student, give the teacher more insights, just makes their life easier while improving the quality and the interactivity of the classroom and the engagement of the students, then that's going to be something that is hopefully habit forming. But we're still in early phases. We're testing it. The early data as it is, we are seeing much, much higher engagement. But
Yeah.
what we're seeing in school districts are the school districts that are investing, that we're working with them on the professional development, the training, and then there's some, let's call it soft accountability. We don't want sticks, we want carrots. Carrots celebrating the teachers who are engaged, who are driving engagement on a platform that is driving outcomes. That is helping to really create a positive flywheel.
Okay, awesome. Okay, let's see if I can get two more questions in actually. What book would you recommend to read? That comes from Tomas Ricard and Senya Chile.
Depends what I'm recommending for. If I'm recommending, I'm
For
actually
a
right now
crew of educators.
for a crew of educators. Okay, well, I mean, it feels kind of shameless. I mean, if for this topic, and I will say
That was a
for this,
layup, I guess.
yes, for this topic, Brave New Words, and maybe teaching students to use AI ethically and responsibly. And this actually does have a lot of like very tangible things to do in your classroom. This is a professional development book, so take a look at it. But I will say, beyond that, just so I don't look like I'm only plugging things that I've been involved with, I think this is a great time to be reading science fiction because I've always read a lot of science fiction, and but like the world is changing so fast, and science fiction just allows you to think a little bit out of the box about what's
Yeah.
possible. But right now I'm reading East of Eden
Awesome.
by Steinbeck, which I never read in school, and I'm loving it. I'm like, how did I never read this before? It's a brilliant book.
Amazing. Okay. Last question by popular demand, because I just saw someone's chat. In many poor areas, children don't have enough teachers or books. Do you see AI as a real solution for them, or will a gap just get bigger if they don't have internet and devices? And let me just also add, how are we going to get kids reading real books again? Because I just saw the data on how precipitously kids reading. I know those are two very different questions, but any closing thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, no, those are big questions. I think we do need to get device access and internet access out to everywhere. The good news is the costs have come down dramatically. They're continuing to come down. If you do the back of the envelope, and people don't necessarily need to even have a dedicated device. If one device can be shared by say 10 kids over the course of a day, and the device costs $50 and it can last 3 4 years, the annual cost per student is single digit dollars. So it's I
Mhm.
think it's affordable everywhere in the world now. And if we do that, I won't claim that you're going to completely level the playing field, but I one of our hopes is that Khan Academy, ideally you do have a classroom and a super skilled teacher, and then Khan Academy can be more personalized, but we do see ourselves as a bit of a safety net education system too. And I'll give you one story that I've been very inspired by. I was actually a talk like this I gave it at MIT about 6 7 months ago. And there was a young woman in the room. Her name's Fatima. And then later she reached out, and I've met her since then. She grew up in Afghanistan and in Kabul, couldn't go to school. Khan Academy was her school. Luckily, she had an internet connection and low cost device. She became a refugee in Pakistan. Khan Academy is all she had. She never went to school, or at least I think above grade school. She never went to school, and she decides she wants to apply to MIT. And MIT is fascinated by her. She seems impressive, but they're like, we have no idea whether you have. We have this other sister
Yeah.
nonprofit called Schoolhouse.world, which actually everyone should point there, especially if you have middle school, high school, older students. All of y'all can volunteer on it as tutors. It's a free peer-to-peer tutoring platform. But it's a way you can certify your knowledge there too, where you take an assessment on Khan Academy, it records your face and screen, it gets peer reviewed, etc. And MIT told Fatima, and a bunch of universities are willing to accept this for college admissions, including
Mhm.
MIT. And they told her, hey, if you can certify yourself in calculus on Schoolhouse, we can consider your application. And so she did. She showed that she
Wow.
knows calculus, explained her reasoning, had the video artifacts, everything, and she got admitted to MIT. And she finished her
Amazing.
freshman year, and I met her. She came out to Silicon Valley a couple of months ago because she was selected. Not that many kids um, globally to become part of this Y Combinator OpenAI boot camp. And she
Wow.
and my wife and I took her out to a local Indian restaurant, and she's like, "Yeah, I skipped the Elon Musk talk. I'd rather have." I was like, "You skipped Elon Musk talk? You should go to the Elon Musk." But yeah,
That is such a beautiful story and such a great way to end. And it's such a great note for all these teachers that that's such a pathway to opportunity, schoolhouse.org. So awesome. Thank you
and
so
I'll say
much,
last on your last
Sal.
question. We adults need to read more. If adults read more, then kids are going to read more. That's my best.
It's
I
true.
try to model it for my kids. But anyway, we could talk more about that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sal. This was such good food for our collective learning. So appreciate the discussion.